Football transfers are becoming boring. Football itself is becoming an elitist sport, and Daniel Ricciardo is back in Formula One. Welcome to another All Sport podcast. I've got Joe with me here today, and there's lots to get into, so let's dive into it. So, Joe, I know you're super passionate about this. You've done a blog on this on allsportreports.com. Go and check it out. But is football transfers in general, becoming really boring?
So the blog is basically outlining everything I don't like about modern transfer, and the fact that the sagas rumble on for so long. Fans crave to know every single detail about every single deal. We're fascinated by the likes of Fabrizio Romano because the celebrity journalists now seem to be more important than the players themselves half the time. And every deal seems to be dragged out in the high-profile deals, of course. Yeah. I'm talking about the Declan Rice saga. Is he going to Man City? Is he going to Arsenal? About the back and forth on that. The David De Gea contract saga.
Yeah.
I mean, David De Gea's had so many sagas over the years, but this summer it seems to be really hitting its heights. The high-profile transfers seem to be playing out in the same boring way that just irritates me, and that's the crux of the blog that I've written.
Yeah, it irritates me to be fair, because there's no the whole here we go aspect of what Fabrizio Romano used to do was almost like it was that bang, it's a surprise, oh my god, this is happening. But because these fans crave the minute details of every clause in every contract and whether that's changed from one day to the next, it just seems like it takes months for these deals to get done, and by the time we're halfway through we know it's going to happen anyway, but there's no point where we're now like, oh my god, it's happening. It's always like, yeah, that happened. Like the Mason Mount deal, it was just like all of a sudden it wasn't a case of, oh my god, Mason Mount to Manchester United, here we go. It was a case of, oh yeah, Manchester United have agreed Mason Mount deal with Mason Mount. Oh, Chelsea might do it. Chelsea will do it. Chelsea might not do it. They want this many add-ons. Chelsea are going to do it, but they want a million extra add-ons. I'm just like, okay, so it's happening then. But it's just the case of small details. It just feels like there's that mystery is lost in football now, which, in all fairness, was part of the entertainment.
Exactly, you're spot on. I mean, it kills suspense of, will it happen, won't it happen? Because you're being fed every single piece of information that you kind of make up your own mind as you go along, really. And yes, football's all about stories, all about drama, but we as fans aren't entitled to know every single piece of changing information with transfers. You mentioned the Mason Mount example. That transfer had been all but completed for weeks, or it was inevitable for weeks. So when it finally happened, like you say, it just didn't feel as grand as what it would have done if one day Mason Mount rocked up to Carrington in a United kit, waving the scarf above his head. That for me is how transfers should go down. Yes, they might be prolonged. They might take months to be completed, but we don't usually see that. I don't think we need to see that. Players can be in talks behind the scenes for so long, but I don't think as fans we have the need to know every single step of the way.
Yeah, and it even starts so much earlier than they're in contact with. These clubs are linked with players 6 months to almost a year in advance. Like, I remember the Bruno Fernandes saga at Manchester United. Like, that was like a year before he actually came. And then there's obviously Declan Rice to Arsenal. That's been going on for about 6 months. Like, the first link there was about 6 months ago. Haaland to Manchester City last season, the first link there was like 6 months before anything was actually happening. So it just kind of prolongs these storylines, which, in all fairness, there's not actually much to them. It's not like the big thing that you need to unpack. It's a club is going to pay another club for a player to move. That's the story that they're trying to like get every single detail out of, just to fill like articles with a load of nonsense that nobody needs to know.
I used to be a sucker for a good transfer rumor. I used to be all over those pages, the BBC website, or even CFAX would have rumors on teletext. I used to love reading those because you would see the rumor one day, and then maybe a few weeks would pass, and then the deal would be done, or it wouldn't. And that's all there was. You weren't seeing every single detail of it because we didn't really need to know. So whether I'm being nostalgic, whether I'm not really moving with the times that a modern football fan needs to move with, I mean, I wouldn't exactly say that I'm an old school football fan, really. I'm open to change, and I've seen the game change myself just in my relatively short time on this earth following it. But it's definitely been a shift in the last couple of years in terms of the football content that we see from these, and I'll use the phrase again, celebrity journalists that have made a career basically tweeting tiny bits of information out 24/7.
I think Fabrizio Romano's style has also changed a lot because he's kind of trying to keep up with demand, and I think he's been kind of overhyped in his own situation. So rather than just doing the information that he has, he's kind of speculating to an extent as well. So he's basically just retweeting stuff that we already know. There's a lot, if you go through his replies, it's just like any Manchester United news, Fab, any Chelsea news. So I feel like he feels in demand of just tweeting everything that he's already said the previous day. Oh, this is what's happening on the Onana deal. And I'm like, you already know that. You've already told us that. And it's like this breaking news or these updates, they're not updates any longer. So it just makes something that we're already bored of even more boring because it's treated like this big story, but nothing has changed.
It's repetitive. It's every single deal as well. And what you get with the likes of Romano is you get people in his replies not just asking for information that he's already put out there, but you get people almost like fanboys saying, football Twitter is not a real place. Let's be honest, it's crazy on there. But you get people being like replying, Ornstein clear. What's that all about? Why has it become a competition between these journalists? And that's why the content is so relentless, because they feel they need to keep up.
Yeah, like
and it's not even their fault, really. They're just the demands of the internet demand them to put more stuff out there, even if they haven't actually got any more news. It's crazy.
And in all fairness, he's done a good job in getting himself to that situation. Same with David Ornstein, getting into a situation where they feel like they're trusted beyond other journalists in terms of transfer news. But as you say, the quality of that news has gotten worse, if anything. Like it's not gotten anywhere better. Like it's not gotten better. It's not been like every single thing they say is true. They're just repeating everything they say.
There's a lot of sources, and there will be a lot of sources that go to these journalists, these respected journalists, with information. And if they put something out there that's been sourced by somebody and they cite that source, that's a huge profile boost for that particular source. So you are going to try and put the information out there via these journalists, because if Romano is saying your information is correct, it's going to give you so much more credibility.
Yeah, and I think something that's equally frustrating and makes it feel like an information overload in terms of these transfer news is the massive amount of aggregator accounts on Twitter that is just pumping out, like, let's face it, bullshit news, as well as then just complete, like, not retweeting but just re-saying what Fabrizio Romano or David Ornstein or all these journalists. And it's like David Ornstein will send out a tweet and you'll get like literally thousands of accounts just saying the same thing and quoting David Ornstein. So it's like you're not just getting one piece of information as a football fan, you're getting it from 1,000 different places, but it's the same stuff. So that can be equally frustrating when you're going through and you're seeing, oh, you know what, let's pick on my phone, let's see if there's any football news that I've missed whilst I've been at work, I'm on my lunch or whatever, go through it and I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. My thumb's getting tired scrolling through and I'm just, oh, fuck, I can't be dealing with this.
It is all, a lot of it, a massive waste of time. I would, and this has been said before, it's not an original thought by myself at all, but I would love it if on, when's the first game of the season in the Premier League? August the 11th? Something like that.
Yeah.
Let's pretend it is August or whatever it is. I would love it if the teams walked out on August or whatever it is, and whoever is there is there. So new players might rock up. That's the first time we see these players as they walk onto the pitch for the first game of the season. How good would that be? Imagine the typewriters then.
Yeah, that would be really good. I tell you what, it'd make a good show if you got your pundits on and you're all there for the first game of the season. Go, who's gonna walk out?
Who's gonna rock up here then?
Exactly, it could be a whole soccer AM kind of show when it's who's coming out.
For Luton. Who is it?
I'm going to be Mason Mount. Honestly, that's a good idea. We'll put that forward. But yeah, in short, I think football transfers are becoming boring, and it's because of that overload of information that just nobody needs. And the storyline of a transfer is lost in this this overload of information. It's like, do you remember? Have you ever read The Lord of the Rings?
No, I haven't got time for that, unfortunately.
So some people find the movies really easy to follow and the books really hard because J.R.R. Tolkien was known as somebody who liked to describe every little detail. He was a linguist, so he really loved words, which is some people's bag, but it is hard to follow a story if you're describing like the little chinks in a tree and stuff like that. And I feel like that's what's happening to football transfers because they're trying to describe every single detail of every single move. That storyline that we all love to follow is completely lost in it. So it just makes people apathetic.
Agree, 100%.
Right. Let's move on because we don't want to talk about something that is literally boring for the whole podcast. So we're moving on now to, is football becoming an elitist pastime? Because let's face it, football was a working class man's game. It was built off the backs of working class people. And now, if you look at the ticket prices, not so much. So, Joe, what do you think? Is it an elitist pastime, or is that a bit far to go down?
So I think that there's different ways to look at it, and I think if you're looking just at top level ticket prices, the demographic is changing massively. But I want to just take it back a little bit in terms of the game itself, and compare it to cricket. The report that came out the other week with regards to cricket in terms of racism, sexism and classism in the sport, basically. And one of the big talking points around that was accessibility. Who can play cricket? Who gets into it? Now, football is still, I'd probably say, the most accessible sport for working class people because you can get a football, you can go to your park if the Tories haven't closed it down yet, or you can go to your five-a-side pitch or whatever, and you can play football. You don't need much equipment. So I think it's still the most accessible sport in terms of playing it for working class people. But when you look at watching it and getting a younger generation of fans involved, we're currently starting to see some hurdles, I think, that are going to stop the working class and particularly younger generations attending football at the highest level. And that boils down to ticket prices.
Has that not always been a similar case? Because I feel like I have read for years and years about controversy of Premier League ticket prices and how expensive they are. Is it not always been the case that the Premier League was just way more expensive than say lower EFL leagues, League Two, National League?
I think when the Taylor report came in post Hillsborough, and obviously the fully seated grounds came into legislation, that was a big catalyst for change in terms of pricing at the top level. They did the government and the groups that organised that tried to bring in a more middle class, upper class kind of demographic into the football stadiums. Lots of talk around hooligans and sort of very much misguided kind of judgment of people that would attend games. And I think from there on, they wanted to try and increase the number of middle class people that would go to make football in the Premier League more of kind of a day out. I don't want to sort of be too critical, but kind of a day out at the theatre kind of experience, you know. And we've seen that over the years with the changing food you have at games, the changing way that fans are treated as consumers rather than supporters. But what we're seeing now, especially in the era of parachute payments, is prices, well, high prices start to filter down now into the EFL as well. A lot of teams in the Championship at the moment, and obviously in recent years, have had parachute payments, which leads to other teams in that league needing to try and bring in revenue elsewhere just to keep up with those teams.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're now starting to see an increase in pricing in the lower divisions too. And I think that's problematic when it comes to trying to get the next generation of fans in to watch games. And it's obviously something very close to my heart, being a Sheffield Wednesday fan.
Yeah.
We're a Championship side who haven't got parachute payments, and we've obviously, you may have seen all over social media the last couple of weeks the backlash regarding our match day prices, as well as our most recent phase of season ticket prices, which reach over £800.
Yeah, I've seen it all over your social media, Joe.
Honestly, I have not stopped tweeting about it. It's something that it's really, really getting to me. It's really enraging me at the moment, because you look at a city like Sheffield, it's the birthplace of football. It's a working class city, big in the steel industry. That industry was decimated in the 80s. So you're looking now at a city that has got two really, really well supported football teams. The people that live there are so passionate about their football. But now we're seeing one team in the Premier League that are charging less than one team that have just come up from League One in the Championship. Now, I see this not just from my point of view as somebody who wants to go to a few games next season and has to try and balance his own books to try and find out which ones he can go to, but also from a perspective of, I want this club to be the future of Wednesday, to be safeguarded. Now, if we're not attracting younger fans to come to the games because they can go and watch Premier League football down the road for a bit cheaper, where does that leave the club in 20 years' time? We've got a near 40,000 seat stadium. You know, capacity is reduced for safety reasons and whatnot. So it's about 33, 34,000 now. We've got a large stadium. We've got, you know, generations of supporters. You know, my dad's a Wednesday fan. My granddad's a Rotherham fan, but, you know, close enough. Generation of support. And that's a common theme with Wednesday fans. You know, there's a lot of generational support there. With this current pricing structure, this could be generation where it snaps, and the ties are cut, people look elsewhere, and that does not bode well for the future of the club.
No, not at all. And I think this is something that a lot of clubs lower down are having to face. And I think there's elements of the parachute payments, there's elements of clubs being bought with huge takeovers. I think there's even as low as the National League with Wrexham getting bought by, let's not say the names, but and just introducing that level of money. I think other clubs have had to be like, well, we've got to compete at some point. We've got to try and most of that league now are all professional teams. When I was a lad with a season ticket to Altrincham, the vast majority of those teams were semi-pro teams. They all had jobs in the week, and they played football on a like Tuesday night and a Saturday, and that was their kind of thing. And now they're all professional, almost all professional teams. Altringham's a professional team. They went 130 years as a semi-pro team and had to become professional last season. And even I went to a couple of Altrincham games with you, didn't I, Joe? And it was like going in now. I remember it being £2 for a child to go and like £5 for an adult, which obviously you correct for inflation, but it's now £20 to get in to see a non-league
Insane for
game.
National League football. It's crazy. Macclesfield next year, bankrolled by Robbie Savage and a businessman from the town. £17 match day prices in the Northern Prem. It's insane pricing.
What's that? It's the sixth tier of English football.
Be seventh that.
Seventh.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. £17. Like people might think, oh, that's not that much money. But when you consider you have to consider the level of football you're going to see, the comfort that you'll have at the game, which let's face it, you'll be standing most of the time. And like you have to put all these things together, and that's not worth £17. It's just not.
It really isn't.
And it's tough because then when you see these lower teams making that money, the teams in the League Two, League One can then correct their prices as well, thinking, well, if they're charging £20, we're going to charge at least 60 because we're a much better football club with a much better product of football, a better product of an experience. So they're going to correct, and it's just going to like blow up, and it's going to be so much money to go to a football game, and that shouldn't be the case because it's literally started as a working class person's pastime. You went to the football on a Saturday. You paid a little bit of money. You had money for some pints. You watched the game. You went home, or you probably went to the pub and had a few more pints. Now you're not going to be able to afford the bloody pints. What's happening to the pints, Joe?
That's the biggest fantasy out of all of it.
It's
Missing out on the pints. Come on, oh greedy owner, sort it out. I want a drink on a Saturday.
There's no joy in watching non-league football if you're not a little bit tipsy.
You need to have one or two, I think, don't you? Exactly. But I think what owners know is that the golden ticket, pardon the pun, that they have is fans are blindly loyal to their clubs, and unfortunately, they will always, unless there is some organised mass movement, they will always pay the prices. And it would be always so hard to get anything going in terms of a movement because people take this line of if you don't go, if you dare criticise, you're not a true fan. And football fans who are loyal don't want to be classed as not a real fan. They want to prove themselves as a fan, but they have to draw a line. And if you're putting your financial situation in life at jeopardy to go and watch your team play football, it's not a healthy way to live, especially if you support a team who are crap.
I think the most well-known example of this is Manchester United, isn't it? With the Glazers just knowing for a fact that they have millions upon millions of loyal fans that will prop up their like dodgy finances and keep them earning millions every year. And obviously there's that element of there have been protests for the last 20 years to get the Glazers out, but none of it really matters if the fan base is split, and none of it really matters if you're still going to the games and still paying that money and still.
That's the problem. It's really hard for a club like Man United to ever boycott them effectively because there's always going to be another couple of million fans ready to jump in that seat when someone vacates it.
Yeah.
It's like if there's an ant on the floor and you squash it or get rid of it, another 10 ants come crawling out of the crack in the pavement. You're never ever going to fix that problem because the volume of supporters is too big. Now, here's something about the sort of demographics of football at the top end anyway, that's quite interesting. Do you know the average age of an Old Trafford season ticket holder in 2023?
Oh, season ticket. I have been to a couple of
That's somebody who's forking out, I don't know, 500-600 quid for a season. I might be wrong there, I don't know.
I'd want to say 53.
You've overshot by a few years, but it's actually 46.
Okay.
Now, if you compare that to what it was back in the sort of 80s, you're looking at 20-odd-year-olds that are populating the terraces compared to 46-year-olds. And I'm not being
They're
ageist.
the same people.
It might be the same people. It might be, absolutely. And not be, anyone can go to the games, absolutely fine. However, what we've seen is people that are older and have more money, and that's purely because they can afford it and the younger fans cannot. And I don't think it needs any more analysis than that.
It is an issue. I don't know how it can be fixed. Does it need to be fixed by the FA? Does there need to be regulations put in place? Does it need to be more patrolled by the so-called governance of our game? Or is it a case of, look, business is business. If you want football to be a business rather than like a charity, this has to be the case. How do we fix it?
How do we fix it? When Gary Neville talks about his fan-led review and Tracy Crouch, that whatever comes of that and whatever group is formed, they need to take a lead in terms of sticking up for the fans, giving them a voice in terms of what the match-going fan wants. Government should really help. And, during the Super League protest, they did mention stuff, but only because it was a big public opinion matter and they could score some political points from it.
And there was massive protests.
I honestly think the next government, the next Labour government or whoever wants to campaign for the side of the working class, make a pledge regarding football tickets, and you've got a huge chunk of votes there. You really have. Make a pledge for that, because I think it's a absolute nailed on voting point for a lot of people.
I don't think people really understand the importance of it as well as a group of people in the UK, how big that football fanatic is. If you promise to help football fans out, because it is so much of our lives, it is something that we're so dedicated to. If you can really understand that, you're onto a winner.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so our final topic of the day, and before we get started, let me just... I know it's a McLaren hat, but it still counts.
I see what you put into there. See what number you put into, Luke. Here we go.
Ricciardo is back in Formula One, and I am so happy. You may have seen my video that I did the other day. I was literally almost in tears, but Daniel Ricciardo is back in Formula One. Red Bull ruthlessness is back. Joe, what are your thoughts?
You know what? I was surprised when the news came out, but then I stopped for a minute and thought about it, and I realised that actually it was inevitable and on the cards pretty much since Bahrain. My first thought was a bit of sadness for De Vries, really, to be honest with you. He is another victim of that ruthless Red Bull system that just chews up and spits out drivers at the first chance they get when they aren't showing what they expect of a driver. But it's hard to be too sad when Danny Ric's coming back into the sport. It's exciting for everybody. He's probably the most popular in terms of, yes, there's huge numbers of Lewis Hamilton fans and Max fans, but those fan bases also cause quite a lot of division and toxicity in the sport. But no one is as well loved as Daniel is, so it's nice to have him back.
I think he's the driver that both of those kind of fans can like. I said in my video yesterday, he's one of those drivers that it doesn't matter what team he's on, you want to root for him. Like, I'm a McLaren fan, so I was happy that Daniel Ricciardo was at McLaren, but I liked him at Renault as well. Even though I dislike Red Bull, I liked the fact that he went back to Red Bull and went with his and you just want to root for him, because when you get such a happy, funny guy and couple it with talent as well, it's just yeah, go on, go for it. And he's just someone that you can get behind, and it's just so nice to have him back. It's such a nice thing. But on Nick De Vries, I really think it was inevitable since Bahrain. I think being a Formula E champion, being 28 years old, which is a very old rookie, coming into the sport with all this pedigree and all this noise, you have to smash it out of the park. And if you don't do that, if you let somebody who, in fairness, has been known to have his own feelings as well in Yuki Tsunoda, if you let him beat you nigh on every week in the same machinery, well, then you're just showing that you've not, that potential is clearly elsewhere and it's not in Formula One, because Yuki Tsunoda's questionable as it is. He's a great driver, but I don't think we're seriously considering Yuki Tsunoda as like a top team driver. I'm not sure. Red Bull might pull that out the bag. I'm not. But when you can't beat him, when you like, and there's quite a fairly big gap between the two, then it just shows that you have to leave. And I think Red Bull are quite, yeah, it's ruthless, it's brutal, you know, they get a lot of stick for it, and, you know, it doesn't sound nice. But ultimately, when something's not working, they fix it. And that's probably why they're one of the best cars on the grid at the minute. Well, they are the best car on the grid, because they don't hang about. If something's not working, they change it right away and they get to it. And it's clearly working. And I think Daniel is probably going to get some decent points in that AlphaTauri. Not, obviously, we're not talking like above a 6th place finish. That's ridiculous. But like, he'll get a few more points than Tsunoda by the end of the season, I believe. And I think that Perez seat is his next year. I genuinely do. But yeah, in terms of De Vries, I think he needs to go and find another niche, because Formula One just clearly isn't for him.
I want to give some props to Yuki this season, to be fair. I think he's driven that car to its potential and beyond, really. Just to find himself in the points as often as he has, takes some doing, really, in that car that's quite poor. I think he stepped up to being the natural team leader. He had a couple of years working with Pierre Gasly, who is a good teammate and was obviously pushing him really, really hard, because Pierre often drove the wheels off that car when he was with AlphaTauri. So I think it's had a good season so far, Yuki. A couple of P11s too, so close to scoring points. But the gulf between Nick and Yuki was so drastic, especially when you come in with the pedigree of being a former F2 champion, Formula E champion. It's not like he's a rookie coming in with no pedigree. You would expect him to be closer. So I think that, yes, he wasn't as close to Yuki as what they want, but I do think probably needed more time. But I can see that why Red Bull pulled the plug, because why should you give more time to somebody who's coming in with such experience?
Yeah. I mean, there was that podcast, wasn't there, the other day, that said Christian Horner had doubts about him from the get-go, and that Helmut Marko was actually the one that was saying, yeah, let's give him a chance.
It's really bizarre. It was a really bizarre signing to begin with, because obviously he was a Mercedes academy driver prior to being snapped up by the Red Bull team, well, the Red Bull group, let's say, at the start of this year. Red Bull have got a healthy junior academy to choose from. In terms of not just quality of driver, but the volume of drivers too. They've got by far the biggest academy out of all of the top F1 teams, stretching down to F3, F4 and beyond. So, you know, if you're someone like Iwasa or Liam Lawson, and you're looking at the seats that are coming up, you probably were a little bit confused as to why they've signed De Vries off the back of, yes, he's FE champion, F2 champion. But then the real turning point for De Vries was the Monza drive last year when he stepped in for Williams.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where people started to tout his name for a seat for this season. But I think in terms of going forward, if you were a Red Bull Academy junior driver, seeing Daniel Ricciardo being drafted in as the second driver to sit with Yuki at AlphaTauri, you're wondering when your chance will come, because surely that is when you can step up and take the opportunity. Yeah. However, that makes me believe that this is, like you said yesterday in your video, that this is an audition for the 2024 Red Bull seat alongside Max.
Honestly, I think this whole year's been about that as well. I think they were auditioning De Vries for that seat as well, because they clearly saw some potential in a Williams car that was nowhere near a decent car last year. So then let's put him in and audition him against Yuki. Let's see how they do. Obviously, that's not worked. Let's put Daniel back in, because at the end of last season, I think people are forgetting this, that Sergio Perez had some dealings with the Red Bull team. Like, it wasn't all plain sailing. There was some arguments, there was some frustration, especially I think it was in Brazil, where Max wouldn't swap back round for Checo to get him P2 in the standings. So there was clearly some tension there already. So Christian Horner's not an idiot, all right? He might, some people love him, some people hate him, but he's not an idiot. And he will have seen that, and he will have started planning for that driver change, because they're never going to give up Max, are they? No. So they've got to look at what that seat's going to become available at some point soon. We need to know who we're putting in it. So when you have a junior team that's still on the F1 grid, the most competitive motorsport thing in the world, you've got an amazing resource there in the AlphaTauri team that you can literally just turn around to them for a year and be like, we want your seats to be the audition for our seats. And right, let's go for it. Let's put Yuki and De Vries in. That's not work. Let's put Daniel back in. We know he can drive the wheels off a car. But let's see how he does against Yuki and see which one of them's better and see which one's getting that seat. I literally think this entire season has been about auditioning. I think next season, that AlphaTauri team looks completely different. There's a thing about a name change, I think, as well. A complete
rebranding as well, yeah.
And I think that's a different team next year. It's back to the roots of being a young Red Bull team that's training these drivers up. But for this year, they needed to find that next Red Bull driver. And yeah, I think if I'm honest, I think it's a good idea. Because if you're Red Bull, you don't need to sacrifice your championship goals to test out drivers in your own seats. You can do it to a team, to your junior team who are currently that bottom of the standing.
It's a nice luxury to have.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a B team playing in the same league as you. And it's also handy for back markers too, if you're lapping the field and you need someone to get out of the way. If it's an AlphaTauri in front of you, they might be a little bit more accommodating, especially if it's one of the drivers that want the Red Bull seat for next year.
Yeah, they're not going to crash
Daniel on YouTube, you're waving Max past. No hold up at all.
Yeah, you're just hoping you can get back in Max's DRS and try and hold with him for a few laps afterwards, really. That's what McLaren did all weekend. But yeah, so I think overall, the F1 world is very happy that Daniel Ricciardo is back. They're not overly surprised that De Vries has gone. The biggest surprise for me is that nothing else seems to have happened in Formula One. We are only a couple of races from the summer break. Usually at this point, all chaos is going off, but literally nothing is happening. So
this might be the trigger.
Yeah, it might be the trigger. If I'm honest, I'm hearing rumours about Carlos Sainz, but I think that's only fan rumours rather than any news. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But I'm very happy that Ricciardo's back. All right, brilliant. Thank you for joining us this week. Can you please leave a like on the video and subscribe? We are wanting to create this community, especially to get us up to 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription would really help us do that. We will be back every week, hopefully. We're hoping to post on a Saturday, so make sure you've got those notifications on, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.